Today, our marketing research recruiting team, Karla Ahern and Kit Nordmark, will be sharing their insights on career planning for research and insights professionals. I want to review a few quick logistics items before we dive in. Only the presenters will be speaking, so your phones and microphones are muted. We welcome questions and we'll have time for a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I'll be collecting your questions via the chat function on the left side of your screen. So please feel free to submit your questions for Kit and Karla throughout the talk. If you experience any technical issues, submit those through the chat box as well. Finally, today's session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. So if you missed part of it or would like to share it with a colleague, you're welcome to do so. If you're new to Burtch Works, we are a specialized executive recruiting firm that is at the forefront of the latest talent news and marketing research. Our data and insights regarding talent trends have been repeatedly mentioned in the press, including publications such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Mashable, Forbes, CNBC, Information Week, and many others. This year, we're also proud to announce that Burtch Works has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's best recruiting firms. Both Karla and Kit began their careers in the marketing research world as researchers before moving into recruiting. Karla Ahern began her career working on-site at Quaker as a project manager for IRI before moving to Knowledge Networks, now GfK, where she focused on custom research initiatives in media, CPG, and pharmaceuticals. Prior to Burtch Works, she led business development and digital media effectiveness programs for Dime Store Media. Kit Nordmark worked in the marketing research industry with a focus in qualitative research. She worked at True, a boutique insights firm specializing in youth, and most recently at the Futures Company, the insight and consultancy division of WPP that recently became Kantar Consulting. Well, that's all I have for the moment. Over to you, Kit and Karla.
Thanks, Mary. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful Thursday to talk about career planning in the marketing research and consumer insights industry. We've been keeping our eye on a couple trends and themes that are impacting the marketing research and insights industry and thought that'd be a great way to kick things off today. Shifting trends are continuing to impact the businesses around us, and many industries have felt some disruption. E-commerce has changed shopping behaviors, and retail has felt the impact. We've all seen the news lately with major legacy names like Toys R Us and the Bon-Ton family of stores preparing to shutter. Health and wellness, an increasing focus on things like nutrition, clean labels, transparency of ingredients. These have made waves for not only food and beverage companies and CPG manufacturers, but it also has a ripple effect for other areas like restaurants and the QSR space. And we all know that technology is moving faster than ever. You blink once and your new iPhone 10 is already outdated. Consumers are becoming even more demanding and have increasing expectations. And these kinds of changes impact today's landscape, the companies operating within it, and ultimately the marketing research and insights professionals working within these organizations. One of the results of these shifts is a difference in the structure of insights teams. Organizations seem to be cutting back on senior researchers and have fewer at the top leading insights teams. And instead, they're beefing up hiring on the junior end. We've seen some client-side companies add new titles at the junior side. For example, some teams have started to used to start at the manager level, but we've seen new roles such as consumer insights analyst or associate research manager become more prevalent these days. These newer levels can serve as a nice way for researchers coming from the supplier side to transition into a client-side role, but it's a little bit tough on the senior end of things. A side effect of teams doing more hiring on the junior end and cutting back top-level roles is that there's even more competition for senior-level opportunities. Researchers with more experience under their belts are now vying for fewer spots at the top, especially when you get above that 140 or 150 mark or so. There are many people looking for something new, but a real shortage of senior positions available. And it gets even harder if you're limited to one specific area or location. Some of these shifts have led to an increase of experienced client-side researchers making the transition to the supplier side or even going out to consult on their own. And we've also seen a continued trend of major corporations making a move, trading in huge campuses out in the suburbs for dynamic office space in more urban areas. We've seen a lot of this here in Chicago. with the latest being McDonald's, who's in the process of moving the vast majority of their workforce from the burbs to the energetic and lively West Loop neighborhood in the heart of the city. Alongside some companies, or location aside, some companies still host larger and more comprehensive insights teams, but with some of these moves and changes, it's also common these days for some organizations to take the other route and keep their research teams smaller and more nimble. There seem to be two sides of the coin here, and there are pros and cons to both. So there's a quick look at the trends we've been tracking. Now I'll hand it over to Karla to talk a bit about job changing statistics.
Thanks, Kit. Hi, everybody. This is Karla. So what does this mean for researchers today? Is there a lot of movement, or are people staying in their current companies or their current roles? Our recent research shows that just about 1 out of every 10 researchers switched jobs last year. And just to clarify, we define changing jobs as switching to a new company, not receiving a promotion or switching roles or departments within the same company. So this means that professionals are becoming more mindful of their career options, and they're starting to look at things beyond the responsibilities of a particular role. They're looking at sector growth, their passion for the industry or category, opportunities for advancement within the role and the organization as a whole. They're looking at the company's mission and corporate social responsibility, things like that. Our research tells us that the average tenure of a marketing researcher is just under 5 years. Junior research professionals typically stay in their roles between 2 and 4 years, and then more senior professionals usually stay in their roles a little longer. Later on, Kit will talk about signs it's time to start looking for a new role and when it may be best to stay put. In another recent study we conducted, we asked hiring managers about their hiring plans for the first half of this year. Interestingly, we found that suppliers are more actively hiring than on the client side. Just shy of 3/4 of suppliers and exactly half of client-side teams are planning to hire in some capacity, which includes adding organically to headcount, backfilling vacant roles, and those who are doing a combo of both. We also took a look at how many marketing research and consumer insights teams are expanding, meaning they're actively trying to add organic headcount. 63% of supplier-side teams are growing compared to 1/3 of client-side teams. Additionally, we looked specifically at client-side retail and consumer packaged goods firms and found that the results seem to support a trend we've been reporting in our salary studies over the last few years, that the CPG industry is not experiencing the growth that it once was. Only 1 in 4 CPG teams are growing, and 44% had no plans to hire at all in the front half of the year.
So that was a bit around changing jobs and hiring today. So I'm sure many of you are now wondering when you should start looking for a new position. Gone are the days marketing researchers stay at one company for their entire career. Now don't get me wrong, you want to avoid an annual job change because your resume will definitely raise some eyebrows if there's too much jumping around. But unless there's an extreme situation, we generally advise professionals to stay in their job at least a year before considering a switch. If you think about it, it usually takes at least 6 months to even get settled in a new position. Timing-wise, there's really no black and white answer. As I mentioned, too many short stints can really be a red flag that you're a job hopper, and that's definitely something that HR and hiring managers take a look for. But it's also perfectly okay to spend only 2 to 4 years in a role. If you've been in the same position 6, 7, 8 years, you may want to consider making a change. And if it's been 10 or more, you really want to think about whether it might be time to branch out. The key is to avoid becoming complacent or reaching a point where you're simply coasting in your role. To boil it down, one of the biggest signs you may want to move on is if you're no longer learning new things. Whether you just started your career or you have 2 decades of experience, it's important to continue to stretch and build your skill set, gain more experience, and expand your areas of expertise. We also talk about white space on your resume. If you only have CPG industry experience, maybe give tech a try. Or if you're a researcher in the retail space, the fast-paced nature of that background can transition well into the restaurant industry, and then you'd be picking up new category experience. At the end of the day, you really want to continue to grow and stay fresh throughout your career. Making strategic moves can help round out your research chops and open up more doors for you down the line. If you feel like you've hit a plateau or you no longer get to tackle new challenges, it may be time to look around. And people often hesitant to explore new opportunities if they're not actively looking. And I get it. When you're happy where you are, who wants to spend the time looking for something new? But really great opportunities are not a dime a dozen. So if you're happy where you are, we encourage you to keep an eye on the market. You never know when your dream job might pop up, and you also never know when your situation might change. So it's important not to get too comfy. It's always a good idea to be proactive. If you get the sense there's some uncertainty in your current role, or there may be changes coming your way, or even if your company or industry is in distress, start keeping an eye out for new opportunities early, way before you start hearing rumblings of an impending layoff or major restructure. It's a good idea to at least have a pulse on what's out there and have a head start on the search. You'll really thank yourself later.
And we don't have any real data to support this, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say that probably around 40, maybe even 50% of the people that we've placed in new roles in the last year weren't necessarily actively looking. So a lot of your colleagues and friends may sort of be in that passive camp. So don't be afraid to at least kind of be open to consider new things. Okay. So one of the best ways to passively market yourself and brand yourself online is to keep an updated LinkedIn profile. And with this in mind, we thought it would be useful to share a few tips for curating a LinkedIn profile that puts your best foot forward. Most of these should really only take you a couple of minutes, but they can have huge impact on marketability within the marketing research industry overall. So as Kit will cover in more detail later on, job levels and titles in marketing research are not always consistent between companies. This means that your LinkedIn profile becomes even more important because you can showcase the value you bring. More information about your responsibilities, tools, methodologies you've used, information about your leadership experience. This all provides context and speaks to your abilities much more than just listing your title. We like to say, think of your LinkedIn profile like a resume. It's a living, breathing entity that's meant to change with your career. So make sure that you're not caught in that set it and forget it camp. Okay, so this may sound very obvious, but be sure you always have your current information updated. Your company, title, location, education, those sorts of things. If you move across the country, take on a new role, receive a promotion, do not forget to update your profile. We've talked to so many professionals over the years who have forgotten to do this. We'll bring it up during conversations we have with them, and when we do, it's often like a light bulb goes off for them. If someone hasn't updated their most recent set of promotions or updated the new area that they've gone into, it often will help to explain why they're not getting contacted by recruiters about positions that are the correct level or the correct area for them. All right, next, take advantage of the real estate at the top of your profile and include the most important info. This is the place to clearly define your title and location. If you have a major life event coming up, you may want to call that out as well. For example, if you're moving to Atlanta in the fall, or perhaps you're graduating with your MMR in 2019. This can signal to recruiters and hiring authorities important information about your timing and location, potentially open up new doors for you. We've seen this as an area where people try to get creative. Now, unless you're in an industry that calls for that, we really advise erring on the side of being clear and professional versus kitschy or vague. So for instance, manager of shopper insights would be preferred over marketing guru or marketing professional. Don't make people play the guessing game, especially if they're looking through hundreds of profiles and they don't have the time to try to decipher your skill set and background. So just be clear about things. We recommend including a short description of at least your current or most recent roles. So go back further if you can, but don't worry about including the same amount of information about your first job out of college as your current one. This description doesn't need to be a carbon copy of what's written on your resume. It's totally fine to include a shorter summary. And I know some people worry that including more information about their background will mean they'll receive even more unsolicited reach outs, but from our experience, it's actually the opposite. And the reach outs you do receive will likely be more targeted and interesting to you. Okay, your LinkedIn profile is a great place to showcase career development. Clients we work with typically look for some sort of advancement or history of promotions, so don't be afraid to list them out. If you're currently a manager but you were hired in as an analyst, definitely denote that on your profile. If you were brought in as an individual contributor but you're now overseeing 2 or 3 people, note that too.
That's a really good point, Karla. And think about it. If you just put your very last or current role, it might say you were an insights director for 22 years. That's way less impactful than showing that you were building responsibility and kind of grew your way and evolved within the company and show the different roles you did hold.
Absolutely. Really good point. Okay, good. So now consistency. So cross-check and ensure that dates, titles, and companies are all consistent with your resume. Recruiters and hiring managers often check out a potential candidate's LinkedIn profile, so be sure those details really are consistent and that they match. Discrepancies between your LinkedIn profile and your resume may raise unnecessary questions and red flags, and this is just a super easy thing to avoid. One question that we often get from people who have recently been let go or left a company is whether or not they should put an end date on LinkedIn. Some professionals prefer not to advertise that they're unemployed, but including an end date could also communicate that you may be more open to a new role and readily available to start. I always personally err on the side of being fully transparent, but I do understand the thinking here. All right, next, whittle your profile down to the most important information. Take off anything that's super old. If you're at least a few years into your career and already have some relevant experience under your belt, remove the waitressing or lifeguarding jobs that you held in the summer before you established yourself as a professional. These are great things to include when you're looking to land your first job out of school, but they can dilute your profile and distract from relevant experience in the field as you get more senior. We always recommend including a photo in your LinkedIn profile. Research shows that this increases response rate and it helps you get noticed. When you are selecting a photo, be sure to choose one that looks professional, one that's clear and doesn't have a distracting background. If you have a photo that shows you in action, say you're on a panel at a conference or presenting to an audience, that could be a really good option too. And you don't need to spend money on a professional headshot, but make sure you're not choosing a photo that's too casual. We often see selfies of people in their cars or in a swimsuit on the beach, and that might not match and support the profile and image that you're hoping to build.
And this last one feels like a no-brainer, but make sure that you have a current email address listed on your LinkedIn. People often forget about this. It's kind of that set it and forget it thing that Karla mentioned. But you want to make sure that you use an email address that you monitor regularly, generally the same one that's on your resume. If it's an old AOL or school email address from 2002, there's a good chance things could get lost in an inbox that you never check. We also recommend using a personal email address instead of using your work email. These are good things to keep separate. You don't necessarily want communication about a current job search going to your current employer. And if you're actively applying for roles, this is how you might hear about, a role that you've been picked up or an opportunity that you might be progressing to the next level. So you don't want to miss out on good news if you have the wrong email.
Yes, definitely. And this also may sound a little obvious, but if you're applying for new opportunities on LinkedIn, be sure to include a current resume with your application. Some of the new one-click features make it very easy to apply for jobs on the go and on your phone, and we understand and know that LinkedIn touts and advertises this feature, but without a resume attached, your application is more likely to go unnoticed. Too many times Kit and I receive applications without resumes, and oftentimes the applicant's LinkedIn profile is sparse. So it's hard to determine if they may be a good candidate. By including a resume, though, it will save the recruiter or the HR professional the time of double checking your LinkedIn profile and or reaching out directly to you to ask for a resume. Furthermore, it signals to them that you're serious about being considered for the role. So that's just our little friendly PSA for the day about the resume inclusion.
Yeah, and one last thing about just adding that quick click. A lot of times we recommend tailoring your resume to the specific role. So if you're just using a one-size-fits-all resume, it may not be the best one suited for the specific opportunity you're interested in. So it's always good to have a little bit more control around what you're submitting. All right, so now that you have your LinkedIn profile ready to go and it's time to start checking out potential opportunities, let's talk about titles. As you may have noticed, job titles within marketing research and consumer insights can vary significantly between different industries and companies. They're really not apples to apples. Karla and I get questions around titles all the time. So what can you do to navigate these waters? We wanted to go through a few common situations that we see as recruiters to help you better read between the lines when it comes to titles and job descriptions in the industry. First, and one of the most obvious examples of title variation, is the difference between client-side and supplier-side roles. Supplier-side titles, so those positions within research firms, consultancies, or agencies, they tend to increase earlier and more frequently. And this is especially the case for client-facing roles. So having a more senior level title can lend more credibility when working with high-profile clients. So we see a lot of supplier-side companies take that route. On the client side of things, so those working in-house for a corporation, provider, manufacturer, or brand, even the most junior researcher on a team will likely have several years of experience under their belt. So an analyst or associate manager on the client side is often quite a bit more senior than a similarly titled role on the supplier side of things. Second, research and insights teams can vary greatly in size. Some teams might have many levels within the organization. For example, one company could have a mix of analysts, senior analysts, associate managers, managers, senior managers, directors, VPs. You get the idea. There can be a lot of titles under the same roof. But if it's a smaller or leaner team, there may not be numerous levels to climb within an organization. A smaller team might not have room to bump you up based on the organization or the company structure, so they may opt to pay according to responsibility or experience instead. For example, we've worked with some research professionals who hold a manager title and have no direct reports, but earn director or even VP level pay. While it's important to be cognizant of making progressive moves throughout your career, it's important to remember that title isn't the only measure of success in the marketing research field. And even if the team is larger, some companies are still relatively flat and might not have numerous internal title levels. We worked with a well-known restaurant chain that had a good-sized team, but throughout the organization, the levels went straight from manager to director, so they just didn't have that senior manager level internally. In a case like this, someone might be at the manager level when they have 6 years of experience or when they have 16 years of experience. So there could be researchers with a pretty wide variety of experience within the same title. Next, as I mentioned earlier, not all managers or even director roles actually have direct reports. These titles may sound as if the role manages people, but it's often not the case with marketing research jobs. In many of these positions, researchers are leading projects, but not managing people. Or for some, they may lead a team of researchers on specific projects, and it's kind of on that project-by-project basis, but they don't have official direct reports. Because of this, previous management experience isn't necessarily required for many research roles. Interestingly, supplier-side researchers often have more opportunity to lead teams starting earlier in their careers compared to those on the client side.
And just a quick note on that too, we'll frequently talk to professionals who are on the supplier side and they're liking the management opportunities that they're receiving. And one of the things when we talk about sort of ideal next steps and what they might look like, they often say, I want to continue to manage and I want to manage a bigger team, but I'd like to move to the client side. So just one note, that if you do make that move from supplier side to client side, it likely won't be the case where you're managing a team right off the bat. So just another thing to consider, as you do explore moves.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Karla. And we also have one more kind of bonus tip here. Even if you have ambitions to take on high-level management positions down the line, make sure you keep a hand in the research as your career advances. So you always have that ability to roll up your sleeves and kind of get in the data if you need to. We found that researchers who focus exclusively on managing people often do their career a disservice in the long term. If you become too far removed and fall out of touch with the tools and methodologies, or if you don't pick up direct experience with some of the new innovations or techniques in the industry, it can make transitioning to new roles that may require this experience much more difficult. And the fifth one. So some industries can be title heavy. Entertainment and financial services, for example. This occurs when title levels increase relatively quickly in relation to years of experience or specific job responsibilities. A researcher in a title-heavy company could potentially be at the VP level with only, 7 years experience or so, and not have the same management experience or responsibilities as professionals with similar titles in other industries. This can sometimes make career moves more challenging, especially when switching industries. If an internal recruiter or HR isn't aware of these title nuances, they unfortunately might incorrectly assume that someone is overqualified for a role. For example, if you're a VP or director at a media company and you're interested in moving over to the CPG or tech space, it might appear that you'd be overqualified for a manager or senior manager role, even if the job itself might be aligned with your experience level. So just something to think about. And last, because some of these situations and title variations we've mentioned, it's not uncommon for us to see researchers take a step back in terms of title in order to move their career forward long term. And we do often see strategic and thoughtful steps backward title-wise pay off. The specific role might allow you to grow and stretch yourself in new ways regardless of the title you might take on. This is especially common when transitioning from a company or industry that is relatively title heavy to one that is not, or making the jump from supplier side to client side. For example, if you've previously been a VP or director on the supplier side, it wouldn't be unusual to move into a consumer insights manager role on the client side of things, and you'd be gaining fantastic experience working in-house.
And we recognize that this kind of taking a step back or taking a lateral move is pretty unique to our industry. You know, if you have friends that work in other industries, I mean, finance or accounting or sales, most people don't end up taking a lateral or taking a step back. So we recognize this is fairly unique. So if you're talking to your spouse or friends, they may give you a little bit of an eyebrow raise, but just know that it is a pretty common thing that we see quite frequently. Okay, so what can you do to navigate titles? We know that it can be very confusing to figure out the right role with all of the variations in titles across the industry. To help combat that, it's really important to make sure you ask questions about the role. These can be really anything that you're interested in, but be sure to touch base on the responsibilities, what the day-to-day looks like in the role, structure of the team, if it's in place, or what the structure is moving into if it's a newer role, and if you'll be working with any key internal or external stakeholders. And not to sound like a broken record, but be open-minded about titles. So while it's important to make sure that the moves you make will help advance your career, we advise against relying solely on the title to do that for you. It would just be a shame to miss out on a fantastic opportunity because you prematurely ruled it out because you were afraid it might look like a lateral or a step back on your resume. When you can, do some research on titles within a company and industry overall, as Kit just touched upon. Sometimes suppliers will give their employees slightly elevated titles, specifically on the consulting or supplier side, to give them more credibility when working with clients. And then other industries like financial services, specifically banking or media, they're known for giving out slightly higher titles. And there could be even a half a dozen VPs of research on a single team. And oftentimes, privately held or family-owned companies have deflated titles. So just kind of keep that in mind too as you're exploring new opportunities. And having an understanding of these nuances should help to streamline your search and give you a sense for the roles you may be a fit for. Just remember, it's best not to jump to conclusions. Use the titles as a guide, but not a hard and fast rule. Focusing exclusively on them may close the door on a great opportunity, or potentially even your dream job.
That's a really good point. We actually just worked on a role that was a manager level on a client side in the CPG space, and it was building a team and function from scratch. So really leading and a function within the organization, really great opportunity. If you had only looked at the title there, some people, if you're a director now, you might not think a manager role would be a good fit for you, but this is a fantastic opportunity to build something new from scratch. And so, don't take it for face value. All right, so we've covered titles in the industry and kind of how to navigate those waters. So we thought this would be a good time to revisit some information from our latest salary study. Before we dive into the data, we want to make sure we're clear on who we're talking about when we say marketing researchers. So for us, marketing researchers, this might include professionals within consumer insights or shopper insights, category management, media or audience research, and we also include competitive and market intelligence professionals. But at Burtch Works, we differentiate marketing researchers from predictive analytics professionals, data scientists, web or digital analytics. They all have different skill sets and are covered in separate studies that we publish each year. We also keep marketing and brand managers separate, since they're likely using insights and partnering with insights or research teams, but are further removed from the process. So here's a quick look at education within the field. Researchers tend to be an educated bunch. In this year's sample, all marketing researchers held a college degree. We tend to see a mix of bachelor's degrees in the field, but common ones tend to be psychology, sociology, economics, marketing, or business degrees. And then 61% of the sample held an advanced degree, either a traditional master's, MBA, or PhD. And a quick note about before we jump into the findings from our salary study, Karla and I get questions all the time around advanced degrees and whether or not to go back to get one. Two of the most popular among researchers are an MBA or a Master's of Marketing Research, or MMR. We recently wrote a blog piece covering this topic, so check it out on burtchworks.com, or we have it posted in a couple LinkedIn groups too. So if you haven't already, check that one out. It highlights some of the pros and cons for getting one of these degrees, as well as things to think about if you're trying to make the decision yourself. At the end of the day, it's a very personal decision because of the financial and time commitment, so you really have to do what's right for you. Most of the roles we work on here don't require an advanced degree, and oftentimes strong work experience can override education, but it can certainly help your resume garner attention during the application process. And then towards the end of the hiring process, if all else is equal, an advanced degree can help tip the scale your way if another contender doesn't have one. If you find yourself asking yourself the same question, MMR versus MBA, make sure to check out some of the comments we have too. We have our blog posted in the Next Gen Marketing Research on LinkedIn, and also the Marketing Research Professionals group. And there's some really thoughtful, real-life perspectives from people in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really has seemed to garner a lot of interest. So it's really cool to see people's perspectives and just their advice for people who have gone back for one, both, or neither. All right. So after discussing everything that goes into planning your career in marketing research, it's also important to know what type of salary your background and experience may command and what your market value is. Here's where our salary study can help. I just wanted to quickly cover some findings and benchmarks we thought would be helpful from our most recent study. All right, on this slide here you can see the median base salaries at all of the job levels we analyze. This is from our 2017 study that we released this past fall. On the client side, salaries are shown by the light blue bars, and supplier side salaries are shown in dark blue. As you can see, at level 1, client-side professionals who are usually at the analyst or senior analyst title earn a base salary of $70,000. And on the supplier side, early career professionals earn a median salary of $60,000. So starting salaries at level 1 are higher on the client side than the supplier. The full breakdown can be found in our salary study, which is available for free download on our website. If you're not familiar with our report, we cut the data by client side versus supplier side, and then a number of other key variables. One of these key factors is education. So generally speaking, an advanced degree, as Kit mentioned, tends to command higher salaries for researchers. In this example here on this slide, we examined salaries for supplier-side researchers with between 5 and 9 years of experience. So someone with a master's earns about $2,000 more than those with a bachelor's, and those with an MBA earn an additional $4,000. When looking at salary by industry, advertising and marketing firms pay the highest salaries on the supplier side. For professionals with at least 10 years of experience, these firms paid nearly $10,000 more than traditional suppliers. On the client side, there is some variance by industry. When looking at client-side professionals with around 5 to 8 years of experience, and these are typically titled associate manager or manager, the higher salaries tend to be in retail and tech, but the highest salaries are seen in CPG. With this discussion around compensation, we also wanted to provide our thoughts and advice on advocating for yourself and reasonably negotiating your salary.
Thanks for walking us through that salary info, Karla. Regardless of your level of experience, everyone wants more money at the end of the day. But how do you get there? We've pulled together some tips to help you think about salary negotiation. The first thing is transparency. It's important to be honest. Whether you're working with a recruiter, talent acquisition, HR, or even a hiring manager directly, be open about your current salary and full compensation, as well as what you'd be willing to accept. We know some are hesitant to disclose compensation information, especially if you fear you're underpaid. But knowing the full story really helps us advocate for you. For example, we worked with a professional just a few weeks ago who happened to be under market value in his current role. He had a strong background and was able to demonstrate his value to the organization. And because we knew his current salary and what his market value was, we were able to make a strong case for him. And he ended up getting a nice bump, increasing his base salary from the low 50s to the 70 range. We know some areas are starting to change policy around disclosing compensation, and we're keeping an eye on this. Some people toy with the idea of inflating their current salary, but we definitely do not recommend lying. You could run the risk of pricing yourself out of a really great opportunity, or worse, if the company asks for a pay stub or W-2 to confirm your compensation, you could get caught in a pretty sticky situation. And I just mentioned market value a couple times. As you think about negotiating, it's good to have an idea of your current market value. Karla went over some high-level salary trends, but our annual salary study has even more info and can be a great starting point to get a good sense for the market. One thing that may impact negotiation is internal salary bands. Sometimes the various levels within an organization have specified salary ranges assigned to them. This is especially true within larger, publicly traded companies. If the company you're negotiating with has salary bands, no matter how much they want to hire you, there may be a ceiling they simply cannot exceed. It's good to have an understanding of these potential limitations going in. You may get to the point where you need to consider making some trade-offs if it's a role you really want.
And we'll talk to people, at the beginning of, exploring a new opportunity, and they'll say, just put my information forward. I'm sure we can negotiate. And sometimes we kind of have to pump the brakes a little bit and say, you already are above the internal grade. They just can't go any higher. So sometimes it's not you. It almost has nothing to do about the candidate, and it's all internal. So don't take it too personally, if they can't go higher. Okay, so whether you're in the offer stage with a new potential job opportunity or you want to have a discussion with your current employer about getting an increase, you want to be prepared with specific reasons and examples to help support why you think you deserve the amount you're targeting. Think about how you can demonstrate the value you'll bring to the team or show the impact you've had in the past. And if you have data that can help support or quantify this, even better. Just be sure to come prepared. It can also be beneficial to highlight your broad experience. Think about the breadth of data you've worked with, the different methodologies you've mastered, the various industries or categories you've touched, the impact you've had on your client's business. Hands-on experience across a spectrum of different areas can help support your discussion. And if you've helped mentor or manage direct or indirect reports who are also succeeding, that can be part of your story as well.
And one high-level point we want to mention, and we talked about this from a title perspective a little bit earlier, but lateral moves are fairly common when it comes to compensation too. It may not be the norm in some other industries, but we often see research and insights professionals take a lateral move at some point in their career, or even a potential step back in order to break into a new industry or fill some white space on their resume. It's a great idea to make strategic moves throughout your career, and it can really pay off in the long run to diversify your experience along the way. For example, if you've spent your whole career working in B2B roles, consider looking for opportunities to transition to B2C to build out that skill set. Or take a lateral to gain exposure to a new industry if you're only worked with financial services or CPG. We also often see supplier-side researchers take a step back salary-wise to make the jump over to the client-side research team. That transition is a desirable move for many, and taking a step back may seem counterintuitive, but it often pays out significantly in the long run. And when you're negotiating, remember, it's not always just about the base salary. Some companies may not have wiggle room with the base, or they might have limitations based on internal equity or those salary bands we just mentioned. It's important to evaluate the entire opportunity. Maybe the company can't adjust the base salary, but they may have another lever to pull, maybe in the form of extra vacation days or a sign-on bonus, or there may even be another area where they have some flexibility. And looking past the money for a minute, it's always a good idea to be thinking about the opportunity as a whole, including the actual role and position. As you're planning your career and making strategic decisions about the moves you make, don't forget to consider the opportunity for learning, the growth potential in a certain role, the ability to fill in white space on your resume. I know we keep saying that, but we really want to drill that home. These are the kind of things that will likely be worth more in the long term than a couple $1,000s in your pocket now.
Yeah, and we can't stress enough how important it is to plan your career for the longer term. It's a different market these days, and people just kind of don't retire with the company they've been with for 30 years anymore. Okay, so now just a couple of thoughts that we had on tactfully negotiating. So this isn't like buying a house or a used car where you negotiate and then you never see the person again. It's a completely different ballgame when you're communicating with your future boss. It's even more important to negotiate tactfully because you're starting to build a relationship that may last for many, many years. Negotiation can be a sensitive topic. If you're very excited about an opportunity and you decide to negotiate, it's important not to draw a line in the sand. Some give and take is just always necessary. So if you come off as standing firm without any flexibility on your end, there's a chance that the company could walk away. One thing to consider, if you decide to negotiate and the employer is able to come back and meet your needs, you should be prepared to accept the offer. It often takes a lot of work on the employer's end, and they have to get multiple levels of approval to try to accommodate your request. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And really nothing leaves a more sour taste in their mouth than if they get there and then you end up declining. So just think about that. If you're actively looking and the timing lines up, you may find yourself in a place where you have multiple offers on the table. So a good problem to have. It can be tricky to navigate this, so we recommend being honest with your potential employer or recruiter. Be open and upfront about other interviews, offers, and timing. That's all very crucial. If they can do anything to move the process along, clients normally will because they would hate to miss out on someone great because they didn't pull together an offer quickly enough and they didn't know anything about the other company's timing. So transparency is key here. At the same time, at this stage in the game, whatever company you turn down is likely going to be disappointed. So being transparent and helping to explain your thought process along the way can help ease the letdown. And even before you get to the offer stage, it's a great idea to make sure that your recruiter or your HR contact knows about other activity and if you have other opportunities in the pipeline. And we know the market can move quickly, especially if the role is a high priority. So if you're halfway through the interview process with a company and then another opportunity pops into your lap, make sure to update them, because again, timing never aligns. So transparency here. And never accept an offer unless your decision is final. We know occasionally people make mistakes, but it's not a good idea to accept unless you've considered the entire offer, gone through the details, and are ready to turn down all your other offers. And that includes a potential counteroffer from your current employer as well. We know counteroffers can be appealing, but there's data out there that suggests that most people who take a counter are not in that role 9 months later. Your current company knows you may jump ship, and it's a slippery slope because if you take a counter, you already have one foot out the door, and you often aren't happy in your role anyway, looking to make a change. So a little money doesn't fix that. It's just a temporary fix at the end of the day. It's just a Band-Aid, so to speak. So that pretty much covers the job search process from end to end. We really hope that you found some of these tips helpful and useful, and we wish you the best in your search. And as always, Kit and I are here if you find yourself wanting to strategize about your career planning. All right, so handing it back over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Karla. Of course, if you're looking to add to your research staff or insight staff, we'd be happy to speak with you and do some brainstorming. We offer both contingency and retained services from entry-level research analysts all the way up to Chief Research Officer searches. Please feel free to send us an email if you want to chat. Kit and Karla love brainstorming and learning about teams and their plans for growth. If you're looking for more information, we've covered the highlights today. You can go to our website and download our full salary report to get the complete insights at burtchworks.com/study. And we're going to be getting to our Q&A in just a minute. So if you have a question for Kit and Karla, please be sure to send it over to me using the chat feature on the left side of your screen. We've already gotten some great questions. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Burtch Works is an executive recruiting firm specializing in placement of quantitative business professionals, typically within the fields of marketing research, analytics, and data science. We're the leading resource for this type of talent and insights about the hiring market and produce 3 comprehensive salary reports each year for our main specialty areas. These reports each contain 30+ pages of data and can be downloaded for free at burtchworks.com/study. If you're looking to post your research or insights opportunity or browse for new opportunities for yourself, you can check out our niche job board, which is trafficked by thousands of professionals in marketing research, consumer insights, category management, and much more. Aside from searches we're engaged in, our job board is open to all of our clients. So if you're just looking for a targeted place to post your job listings, definitely get in touch with us. We offer several options depending on how many roles you'd like to post. If you're interested in more insights about the research and insights hiring market like the ones presented today, check out burtchworks.com/blog, where we post periodic updates with hiring market insights and analysis, as well as flash survey results and career advice. And you can also follow Burtch Works across all our social media channels. That way you can stay updated on all of our latest research. And now we have a few minutes for questions, and we've gotten a bunch of good ones. So let's jump right in, Kit and Karla. One question about where we're seeing the hiring for marketing research. Is there specific industries that you are seeing currently that are more active than others?
That's a good question. Some of it depends on region. I would say we continue to see an influx of roles come in tech, e-commerce. Video gaming has been pretty big for us the last couple of years as well, and we've seen a lot of activity there. And I know we've covered in our salary webinar as well as today that CPG isn't necessarily expanding, but we've still seen some roles come in that area. So I would say that there's still a fair amount of activity there as well.
Yeah, I think on that CPG note, we're not seeing teams hire 5, 10 people, but we are seeing them backfill some organic growth, or some of the teams that cut back a couple years ago are now ready to hire 1 or 2 people. So.
And then on the consulting and supplier side, as we mentioned, we've seen quite a bit of growth there. Sometimes they're with smaller or boutique firms who focus on highly strategic custom work. Sometimes it's with suppliers that have a little bit more of a niche focus, perhaps in pharma or perhaps in product work or something like that. So those kind of nimble, mid-sized and smaller suppliers, we've seen quite a bit of activity there too.
Okay, thank you. On another note, for more junior level professionals, maybe trying to get their foot in the door with a first position or early on in their careers, do you have a couple of tips on how to get your resume or your LinkedIn profile to stand out among the crowd?
So if you're pretty quote unquote entry level, try to maneuver and try to put the experience that you do have, however limited it may be, try to kind of reframe it and put it in context that a potential employer might be able to grab onto. So if you led a group in college, or if you were the lead on a project for your master's program or something like that. And this is the place, if you're trying to get your first job, this is a place where it is okay on your LinkedIn profile and your resume to list previous work experience. So go ahead and put the hosting job or the waitressing job on there. I think it's less about skill set when you're looking for your first job, and more about any kind of work experience, your ability to work hard, your ability to learn new things and grab onto new things quickly. It's kind of those more intangible skills. So if you're able to indicate to a potential employer that you've put your head down, you've worked hard and done what you can, those are the kind of things they're going to be looking for and kind of grabbing on when hiring more entry-level folks.
And really that first position, landing the first one, is the toughest. So if you're able to kind of leverage some of the group projects you worked on, maybe if you took a marketing research course or two, anything like that that can help show that you have some exposure to the industry can be a great thing. And then once you land the first one, then it gets a little bit easier after that, because then you'll have real-world experience to start to bulk up your resume and LinkedIn.
And then once you do, assuming and hopefully you get to the interview process, talk about your passion and excitement too. That goes a long way. It can kind of almost help make up for some of the experience maybe you don't have yet. But if you talk about your curiosity and love for learning. Those are things just really to tout when you do have a phone interview or a face-to-face. We hear all the time, oh, we love their fire and their passion, and we love the curiosity. Those are intangibles we hear all the time.
Oh, thank you. I have a couple people have asked about if you have been in your role for maybe 5 or more years, how do you kind of reflect on your resume, your progression, if there hasn't been a title change or other obvious sort of promotion?
That's a good question. And I think when we made the points about progression, a lot of that, if you work, I don't know, say you're on the supplier side and work at an Ipsos or a Lieberman, they do tend to give you promotions, so you will be able to show some advancement from analyst level to associate, manager, kind of show it that way. If you've been in a role and say you've been a senior research manager for 5 years, it may be a little bit, I guess, less pertinent for that if you have progression in roles previously or other moves that you've made. Other things you could do is just make sure that you're giving examples of the work that you're actually doing and showing that you're taking more on. So maybe after 2 years you did have a direct report that you took on. Make sure that that's added in. Or you can even say increasing responsibility over 5 years. You can spell some of that out. So it's really your opportunity to show some of the progression you've made. And if you need to spin it a little bit, that works too.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think you can demonstrate progression without necessarily a title change. And this is really where I think the bullets on your resume and the bullets on your LinkedIn profile really come in handy, because you're able to illustrate what you've done and how your research has helped move the client's business forward. As Kit mentioned, maybe you've got some direct reports, maybe you've taken on some new methodologies, some more complex and strategic projects, perhaps you've moved into more of a client-facing role. These are all details and nuggets that will help add color and show you've moved on. So don't be afraid to go into a little bit of detail. We always say you want to make sure that your that your resume does not read like a job description. It shouldn't just kind of be tactical, managed, questionnaire design. Like, add a little bit of color and add a little bit of kind of flavor, and give the reader an idea of what you did and how you've evolved in your position. So there are ways to signal progression, I think, without necessarily having that jump or change in title.
All right. Another couple people have asked about the move from supplier side to client side, and a little bit more detail around what that might look like, both salary-wise and responsibility-wise.
Another good question. Let's start with the responsibility piece. And one of the interesting things, on the supplier side, one of the great things is you get exposure to oftentimes many different industries, different project types, different types of methodologies. No day is ever the same. It seems like you're always tackling new problems, and especially on the custom side of things, everything is very specific to the client and role and objectives that you're working on. Taking that over to the client side, the interesting thing is on the supplier side, you often, when you're done with a project, you hand off the report or do the final presentation, and that's kind of the end, and you don't always know what happens with the work you've done, unless you see a commercial you worked on or something like that. On the client side of things, you really do have that opportunity to see the work through. So once the report is done and the final presentation, you then can work to socialize it internally, working cross-functionally with various business units within the organization, making sure that everyone is kind of thinking that consumer first mentality as far as strategic business decisions. So there can be a learning curve to that, getting to navigate different business units internally, and maybe you're working with product teams and design and marketing and branding, media teams. A lot of times you're navigating a lot of different buckets within the company, so there can be a learning curve with that, but a really exciting one. And then you get to see where the work goes at the end of the day.
And then from the salary piece, that's going to be, that's going to really vary from person to person in the exact situation. Some people, I know we talked earlier this morning about how some people might have to take a step backwards or a lateral. That might not be the case for everybody. Some people may be able to take a progressive next step when it comes to salary. And another thing to consider is just on the client side, it tends to be a little bit more of take a total package perspective kind of look when you're thinking about compensation, because on the supplier side it's often base, perhaps a bonus, sometimes there's equity, and then on the client side it tends to be, there's usually a base, sometimes there's a bonus, there might be slightly greater 401k matching, there could be a little bit of stock. So that's where it becomes even more not an apples to apples comparison. So kind of take a step back and make sure you consider the whole picture when looking at compensation, and do consider taking a lateral or perhaps even a small step back in order to be able to potentially make a progressive kind of move in the future and kind of help with your potential earning later on, as we've seen in our salary study, because client side does often pay a little bit more than supplier side depending on level.
Thank you very much. I think that is actually all the time that we have for questions today, but we appreciate everyone who submitted questions. And if you'd like to see if we have roles that are a fit for your experience or to discuss your hiring needs, please send us an email at info@burtchworks.com to start the process. Thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great day.